The film begins with the gynecologist, Victor, as he prepares for a C-section delivery. He delivers a woman who gives birth to a baby girl, and he names the little girl Elizabeth. He and his team keep examining her carefully after birth, and then Victor injects a small sphere connected to her brain into her forehead to run experiments on her. After that, he places the baby in an incubator and heads to the airport planning to travel with her. But one of his assistants rushes to him and tells him that the medical association found out, and that they need to leave quickly before things get worse. Victor knows no one will accept Elizabeth, and will soon learn why. Later, Victor appears at a hearing with the association alongside his assistant and Dr. James. They tell him that the media has learned everything, that they even have a picture of the baby, and that he needs to face the public and explain what's going on. But he refuses to show the baby to anyone and asks them to wait. They refuse, because the public and the government won't stay quiet, especially if he starts running experiments on the girl. Claire, Victor's wife, arrives home, and her daughters run to greet her. She had left them with the nanny, Mary, and her husband, Richard. Claire asks Mary if she called Victor to join them for dinner, then heads upstairs to rest. Meanwhile, Victor and James take baby Elizabeth and assign her a private room in the hospital for care and for Victor's experiments. The next day, Victor attends a press conference to talk about his project. He introduces himself and explains that he's been researching this for 10 years to carry out genetic and biological experiments. He announces Elizabeth's birth date and tells them she is the first human clone. He shows them pictures of her, and reporters bombard him with questions. From his answers, we learn he is both the donor and the father of the child, and biologically he's also her brother. He isn't the only donor, there were multiple contributors. Reporters keep pressing him, and we learn that many Americans strongly oppose this kind of experiment because they believe it goes against God's will in creating life. When they ask him who the mother is, he dodges the question and avoids revealing details. Then he excuses himself and leaves. Victor returns home where his daughters are having dinner with Mary and Richard. His daughters greet him, and we notice Mary seems a bit drawn to Victor. He asks about Claire, and they tell him she's asleep. He goes to her, talks briefly, and she leaves to be with the girls. Victor goes back downstairs and stands staring at embryo paintings, unaware that Mary is watching him. Later that night, she walks out into the darkness and heads to a nearby house. She sits there remembering Victor holding a baby and telling her and Richard that Ethan didn't have much time left, maybe a week or two. Ethan appears, and it becomes clear he was Victor's first clone child for his experiments. When Mary took Ethan to raise him, he never stopped crying. The next day, Richard is playing with Victor's daughters while Mary prepares breakfast. She tells Victor she needs to speak with him about Ethan, because the boy has become uncontrollable and his condition is getting worse. She asks him to come see him. Victor says he will, but not today. Meanwhile, the news is talking about Elizabeth, and they bring on a genetics expert who says the baby could have been born with severe deformities and may die a few months after birth. Claire remembers seeing Elizabeth in the incubator when she was born, and we learn that Claire herself was the surrogate who carried the baby. Victor arrives at the hospital and checks on Elizabeth with his assistants. He asks why no one told him she got sick, since she developed eczema. They tell him it's nothing serious and that they handled it, but he yells at them saying only he decides her treatment. He and James keep monitoring her genetic development, but the baby cries constantly. Even so, Victor continues his experiments. We then notice Laura, Victor's second assistant, secretly contacting someone from the media. She's the leak spreading all the news. Victor wakes up from a nightmare and asks James about Laura. They notice a strange man walking through their restricted floor. Victor confronts him. The man pretends he got lost, but Victor kicks him out angrily and calls the police because he suspects something. Police arrive to investigate. Mary, meanwhile, remembers Ethan as he grew older. She recalls trying to teach him to say names, but he would scream in her face. She remembers how she always found him breaking things, constantly screaming, completely abnormal, and never listening. She was terrified of him. She tells Richard, and they end up installing a barrier on his bedroom door to keep him from leaving and hurting them. Victor heads out and sees protesters gathered outside the hospital, along with the media. Lawyers file a petition asking the court to examine the baby to determine whether Victor violated federal law and to make sure he didn't perform unauthorized experiments. They accuse him of ignoring moral and religious boundaries as well. Victor watches all this from home. Claire tells him their daughters are waiting for him at dinner, but he refuses, saying she has no idea what he's dealing with. She leaves him and walks away. Victor decides to bring Elizabeth home from the hospital, accompanied by police officers, and he brings James along. Claire is playing with their daughters when Mary calls her to come downstairs because Victor has brought the baby home. Claire's maternal feelings overwhelm her, and she goes to the baby, takes her from Laura, and immediately calms her down after she had been crying hysterically. Victor and Mary both watch this moment. Mary returns home and finds Richard working on a craft. She asks if he fed Ethan, and he tells her he refuses to feed someone like that ever again. Mary is torn, wondering how Ethan ended up this way despite being on medication. She tells Richard that Victor brought the baby home and that she looks completely normal, nothing like Ethan. She then remembers how deformed Ethan looked when he was a newborn. After that, Claire went to rest. Once the police left Victor's house, Laura took advantage of James and the other doctors being busy, called the person she had been secretly speaking to, grabbed her bag, and told them she would be back soon. The next morning, Claire went out with her daughters. The girls woke Victor up, telling him there were people outside. When he went to check, he found a protest forming right in front of his house. Security stopped him from approaching them, so he went back inside. When he returned, he found that the news had already published Elizabeth's picture and discovered that she was being kept in his home. They had also noticed the strange device attached to her forehead and brought in a specialist on live television to discuss it. The expert said that Victor would be arrested very soon because of the cloning procedure he performed. Victor became extremely stressed and called the police, begging them to give him at least 1 month until the baby was fully ready. They refused and told him he had to present her for examination immediately. Furious, Victor smashed his phone. Reporters kept interviewing both supporters and critics of Victor's work. Meanwhile, Mary walked downstairs and called out for Richard, only to realize he wasn't home. She prepared breakfast for Ethan and took it upstairs to him, but when she saw him staring at her with terrifying eyes, she became anxious. She left the food and walked away. Ethan, as usual, smashed the plates and began screaming. The media continued covering every opinion. Some were against Victor's actions, while others believed his experiments on Elizabeth could lead to major scientific breakthroughs. Laura appeared on a talk show and announced that she had never supported what was happening and publicly distanced herself from the entire project. Victor watched her from home. He then went to check on his daughters, who were playing with Richard. Seeing them triggered memories of another infant he had once treated, one who couldn't stop screaming. He also remembered the moment he told James he needed to leave, explaining that he planned to burn the body of the clone. James left him, while Victor decided to delay the girl's death and took her with him. We return to the flashback, where Victor looks at his daughters, and it becomes clear that one of them is the girl from his experiment. Victor enters the lab while James is working, picks up Elizabeth from her bed, studies her for a moment, and then takes her to his wife, Claire. Outside, the protests around their home continued to escalate. Victor told Claire they needed to leave immediately, and she agreed. Laura walked in holding Elizabeth, but Mary suddenly remembered Ethan's deformities as a baby. She quickly grabbed Elizabeth from Claire to check if the girl had the same abnormalities, but Claire stopped her. Mary returned home deeply distressed, and Richard tried to calm her down. Meanwhile, Victor had recorded a video introducing himself and explaining his entire experiment. Later, he woke up from a nightmare, sweating and looking around in fear. The next day, Claire was packing her things and her daughters. When she looked out the window, she saw Victor and Richard running toward Mary's house, so she followed them. When she arrived, she found Mary dead and Victor kneeling beside her. She immediately realized Ethan had killed her. Claire screamed and blamed Victor for everything that had happened. He tried to calm her down but failed, so she walked away. Victor went to Richard to comfort him, but Richard shouted at him, beat him violently, and eventually fainted. Victor carried him out of the room, only then noticing Ethan hiding under a chair. He closed the door on him, listening as Ethan screamed and destroyed everything inside. Claire sat terrified with her daughters. When Victor tried to approach the house, she refused to open the door for him. Meanwhile, at Richard's house, Richard woke up to the sound of Ethan clawing at the door. He grabbed a gun, determined to kill him. He fired at the door, thinking he had hit him, but when he opened it, Ethan burst out in a frenzy, grabbed a metal pipe, and struck Richard on the head. Victor went back to his lab searching for the lethal injection he had once used on Ethan. He headed to Mary's house but found Richard dead. He followed the blood trail until he found Ethan, but he couldn't stop him. Ethan struck him and ran toward Claire's house. Claire continued packing, but when she heard her daughters laughing loudly, she went to quiet them. Meanwhile, Ethan entered the lab and stabbed James repeatedly. Outside, the protesters' voices grew louder, catching Claire's attention. She called out for Victor and James, but instead she came face to face with Ethan's deformed face. Terrified, she ran and locked herself in a room. She heard Elizabeth crying in the other room, so she hid her daughters in the closet and ran toward the baby. But Ethan was already standing beside Elizabeth. Claire screamed, grabbed the baby, and tried to escape, but she tripped and fell. Ethan began beating her violently. Victor regained consciousness, rushed to them, and managed to save Claire. But Ethan grabbed Elizabeth and ran. Victor chased after him, desperately trying to rescue the baby. Ethan pushed him aside and then threw Elizabeth down the stairs, killing her instantly. Victor collapsed in horror and heartbreak. He walked down the steps, picked up Elizabeth's lifeless body, cried over her, and gently set her down. Then he went to Ethan, spoke to him softly, and asked him for a hug. Ethan approached him, only for Victor to inject him with the deadly serum. Ethan screamed in agony until he died. The protesters continued shouting outside. Victor walked out to them holding Elizabeth's body and told them, "She's gone." Then he screamed at them in anguish. Suddenly, the same man who had previously infiltrated the hospital appeared and shot Victor dead. Claire rushed to free her daughters from the closet and held them tightly. The media broadcast Victor's final recorded video. The police arrested the shooter and took Victor's and Elizabeth's bodies away, while Claire was taken for treatment. And that's how our film ends for today. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.